let's talk about a time you failed. Okay. So you're up here, but help us learn from your up and down. Tell us a story where you tried to reach out for more people and it absolutely failed.
That's a great question. And I think one thing that at Saddleback is very apparent is that we're willing to try anything. And often there's failure in that. And we learn a lot from our failure. And we just had a pastor come in here a couple weeks ago, Pastor Mike Howerton, who was one of the founding. He was the first staff pastor, and he told us this weekend to staff and to the community how Saddleback often is a guinea pig. We're kind of like the lab rats on things that get rolled out to all, at least the evangelical churches around the world, because of how we test campaign strategies and different things like that. And so we're definitely, I'm led to, I'm told try a lot of new things and we'll find out. One thing I'll let you in on a story or just kind of an idea that has really been part of a big failure of how we do things was when I first started this role, I really thought the chat experience would be our primary vehicle to get people connected. I really leveraged a lot of what I do around building up the chat host and making sure that they were there and building into that. Well, what happened very quickly is, as a failure moment, it was like nobody was really, statistically, when I looked at the amount of people that were watching every weekend, I couldn't get enough people to sign up for the chat host because it was more of a I'm going to chat there. It was very much like an AOL type of movement, like Web 1.0 kind of movement. And I couldn't get enough volunteers to staff it and have it be dynamic. And the other thing was there wasn't enough people engaging. And so we had built our process really around getting people connected around the chat host, and it wasn't working. We might only have less than 1% of people engage on the chat room every week. And so I had a lot of conversations with IT and development and communication. It was like they kept on thinking the chat role was this core role, and I just kind of had this moment. I was like, no, we've failed here. That this cannot be the source of growth if we're only getting less than 1%. And it just wasn't working. And so we had to make a decision to shift to making a small groups team the primary focus. And that was a big learning curve because a lot of people, still a lot of people doing online ministry, they make their chat host the main role, which is okay. If it works for you, it works. But it did not work for us, and it wasn't working. And I had made it the number one and for a while. And we went through that for about the first 2 years.
Okay. And that's what I was going to ask you. How long did you invest into the chat stuff? Was it 2 years?
It was probably longer than that. It was probably 3.5, honestly, of just investment. And I think part of it was when I saw the vision for how we can start small groups and how I needed to make sure each small group was healthy, and the only way to do that was to have a volunteer team. I kind of had that push, and I saw that potential there. And if you're a chat host, this was the issue. It's a valuable role, but it's a minimal commitment. You're just you're repeating whatever the person's saying. And I just felt like I also wasn't utilizing the people's gifts that were showing up every week. That they were just kind of asking questions, and it was great and it was dynamic, but I felt like I was underutilizing people. And it's kind of like that, I think Apple has done this with their design of their products. The first, version of the iPhone, everything was very lifelike on the devices. It was woven, and it was very and then when they just released the most recent iOS update to the brand, everything was flat. No longer did they need to make this appeal to, hey, this is something physical that's going digital, and we need to make sure they still understand that it's still physical. It's like a calendar needs to look like a physical calendar. Well, no, we're at a place now in our society that people get it. Online's online, and there doesn't need to be a transition. And I kind of have felt like for us, we had to go through that transition, and that was, part of it was we had to learn in it. But part of it was I wasn't going to invest anymore. I knew it wasn't turning out enough spiritual health to make it worth continuing investing.
Something in our staff meetings as we sat around with the pastor, the music minister, and the admin, the youth minister, children's minister, much smaller staff than you guys. But one of the things that would come up was we would come up with an idea, and then I kept seeing certain staff members blame it on the people. Well, if the people would just be more invested. And I kept asking the question, I want to see if this resonates with you. We can't change the people, but we can certainly change the staff. I mean, we've got the people who we've got, right? And so if they're not on board, then maybe we should change what we're doing. And I voiced that. I can't tell you how many times that, it's not them, it's us. It can't be them, even if it is them, So did that play a role? Because I hear pastors all the time complain about their congregation not getting on board to the program. And you I'm sure you examined that as you were looking at, is it the people or is it me? And it's hard to point that finger back at what you're doing. Can you talk to that just a little bit?
For us, it's, I think part of it is we realize at Saddleback at least, and I've learned this from just being under, the leadership that I am, is that, part of it, you got to figure out who God has brought to your church, and you got to ride that wave wisely. Obviously, you can be as dynamic and innovative and all those things as you want, but obviously, I believe the Spirit does that work and brings people there. I think there's things you got to be proactive on and on top of, because you are part of that equation. But for us, it's this is who God's got here, and part of that is true that staff can change, and but the people won't. And fortunately, at least Saddleback, we're always new staff is coming on and leaving all the time, and part of it, we're a training ground for people. They go off and do others. So we have a culture at our staff that's very like, people come and go, and it's part of the learning process. And a lot of times people get Rick always says people get called through Saddleback a lot of times, because you get on staff and you learn, and then you get so excited, like, oh, I can do this here. And I know there's been a lot of things that have started up in other places because of that kind of transition through. So we definitely are very hands open on the potential of, hey, it's not a big deal to change staff around and do that, because ultimately we're about doing whatever's possible to save people. And that means that might be doing something that's uncomfortable. And we would rather as staff go the extra mile. And I think if you're on staff at Saddleback, you get it. Something we say all the time is, you got to be fast, fluid, and flexible, because we're always changing. And we're doing that ultimately so that we can ride those waves that the Spirit's bringing.
That's good. Well, tell me about your proudest moment in reaching people. What was one of the most successful moments where you were able to reach out and make an impact like you envisioned it, or even greater?
Well, I think that's a great question. And there's been a lot of little moments. I think, obviously we have big moments of people watching online, and we've had some pretty amazing numbers. But I think the most powerful moments is when I find out people are taking this online experience and doing something offline in their area, because that's really our big goal with the online camp, is that we want people to go online to offline by hosting a group in the area. And so when I hear,
do you have a specific story that just sticks out to you that comes to mind here?
Yeah, one of the coolest stories that I've talked about a couple of times, and Rick has shared on a Sunday as well, is that there was a woman, Grace, in the Philippines that was watching online every week, and she was actually, and I'm not sure of like the details how this happened, but she was able to somehow get access to the internet in a female prison and watch online the services. And she reached out to me and she said, "Would it be okay if I took this online stream and I invited other people in the prison to watch it with me?" And I, of course, said, "Yeah, do whatever you want. No restriction." Anyways, fast forward 3 years later, I just got an email from Grace last night. Over 335 people watched the service online in the prison in the Philippines, and that is a weekly number. Every week, 300 plus women get together and watch this. And so you kind of just think about it. Okay, when I think online church, at least, I'm thinking of an individual watching on their computer, kind of what we're doing right now. But really what it's moving towards, and this is what's happening with our Roku connected devices and so forth, mediums that we're trying to get a presence on, is that more and more people are watching with families, and it's moving away from a solitary experience to really a community experience. And so those are the stories that excite me, because really I don't want somebody to watch alone. I really don't. I want them to watch with somebody. I want them to watch with their spouse or a friend or their small group. And so stuff like Grace gets me excited, because that's got so much potential.
Well, I'm going to quote you, and this is going to be me learning from you, okay? So I was listening to the podcast last week about you debating, I forget what his name is, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, and so y'all were debating this very topic, and you were talking about it's not just one-on-one, somebody watching, it's actually becoming a community. People are getting together and watching, they're having Bible study, and I thought I learned a lot perspective. I learned a lot. I didn't know that was going on. In my ministry, I just assumed it was one-on-one all the way through because we only averaged 10 to 15 people that were watching the live stream. But to see the bigger churches that they're actually having these pockets and groups, that's pretty amazing. And I think that's something churches need to consider and probably promote. For example, having a Roku channel or something that's more easily put onto those bigger screens. Well, by the way, your podcast is social media.church, right? That's your website.
Correct.
So if y'all want to check out that latest podcast, it was really, really good.